Assassin's Promise by Thomas Woodward, Chapter 107. I turned in the darkness to Eve, but I could not find her. Stannon? Eve? I felt the strange thrumming move through me. It felt like a rumbling that began in my feet and moved through my entire body. My jarred thoughts spun as I tried to concentrate. I could feel the warmth, but sound was strangely absent in my ears. The darkness covered my eyes like a deep blanket, hiding me, protecting my mind from what it could not fathom. I moved through the nothing that pushed at my consciousness, bringing forth indescribable dread and wonder. Sound! I could hear again. I felt light beyond my tightly clamped eyelids, and the sensation of nothingness retreated, replaced by heat and the feel of moving air. I opened my eyes, afraid of what I would find, and turned in a full circle to find myself alone, in the center of a strange grouping of stones that seemed partially sanded away by time. Looking behind me, I could see the low rise of an outcropping of bleak stone, similar to any number of other such cliffs I had seen against the desert landscape. There were no other footprints in front of me. Feeling the heat of the sun above, I moved forward tentatively. I could see a small wavy dot on the horizon. It could be no more than a mirage, but it looked like a village. I hoped for the latter. A body toppled onto mine from above. I heard a grunt as I was pressed into the sand. I saw a boot step away as Stannon disentangled himself from me. After I crawled away, I came face to face with Eve, who crouched behind a rock. She looked worried and helped me rise to my feet. Stannon was muttering a string of black curses that made for easy listening, making no effort to disguise his mood. "Where are we?" I wondered aloud. "We have been guided near one of the human cities." Eve cocked her head, listening to something I could not hear. She looked about, a worried frown creasing her face further. "Something went wrong. I did not know what would happen." Looking at Stannon, Eve continued, "You were not welcome in our lands. We are lucky to have survived the journey." "We could be anywhere, you damned woman. We could be halfway across the continent for all you know. I hope your disguise works better than whatever that was. Once the lad and I have reached our destination, you will leave us." Stannon's tone was cold and held absolute certainty. Lifting myself up, I moved towards the dot on the horizon. With no shelter, we would not last long, unprotected in the elements. A desert storm could rise from a clear sky. There was simply no predicting them. "For once, the boy has some sense. Stay and die if you want." Eve shot a look of pure hatred at Stannon and moved to follow. It would be an uneasy few hours. Eve moved with a grace that took my breath from me, even now. The change in her appearance had taken nothing from her beauty. The strange garb she wore allowed her to move nimbly, like a dancer. She made almost no sound as she caught up with me. Without speaking, she took my hand and slipped hers into mine, linking them together once more. I felt warmth again. My heart leaped in my chest. Even this small gesture held indescribable tenderness. I wanted to fill myself with her. Stannon glowered, although he did not speak. He stepped with precise movements and kept shifting his single dark eye back on the two of us. His dark garb soaked up the heat, and I could see steam rising off him as we trudged towards the village. Within another hour, we were at the gates. They stood barred with thick wooden beams that had been pushing through a grill of holes to keep the opening closed. There were spaces between the beams, but none that would admit a person. A guard stood several yards off, speaking softly with another man. People trudged past on the small thoroughfare within the city's walls. Men and women alike had despondent looks. They kept their faces down. A beaten populace. Where were these people heading? Many of them had the look of travelers who had been on the road for some time. Eddie stood next to the gate, waiting for the soldier to return to his post. "Open the gates," Cain bellowed. He had already lost far too much time. His masters would not be pleased to hear of all the delays. Cain had promised death of his target within 3 months, which had already cut thin on the time needed for travel. But the price had been great, and and it would gain him great favor in the eyes of the guild. The mad, blind god cared nothing for time, only the deaths of the guild's victims. The spilling of the blood brought the blinded god appeasement. Cutting away the life of a high-ranking official like Lord Azric would bring Cain further greatness. He could not think of failure. Those thoughts were for lesser men. He still needed the boy. It irked him, but he would be unable to complete his mission without another willing tool. The boy no doubt suspected that his life was forfeit, but Cain would not draw back the curtain willingly, until just before the end. Hope was a powerful tool. He could wield it and provide a path that could lead to another fate. It was what the boy needed, after all, to continue. Cain would provide. The guard turned, surprised and a mixture of anger at being called so abruptly. "Who comes to our village? Where do you hail from, travelers?" The guard's eyes goggled when he saw Eve, covered in her strange garb from head to toe, pale hair shimmering like a river of beaten gold. "We come from Sky Peak," Cain growled, "past the northern reaches. We are weary-worn and are only passing through." Cain's patience was wearing thin. Each question the guard asked lowered their chances of being admitted without issue. "Sky Peak? That's leagues from here. You must have been traveling for weeks. Bring the woman forth, and we'll have no faceless in our town. She must be able to speak for herself. Step forward, woman." The guard's demeanor became more wary. He grasped his spear more tightly, a look of grim determination coming over him. Eve moved forward slowly, her face looking down, her expression unreadable. "Well, where are you from? Speak, woman." The guard waited for Eve to answer, impatient. Cain tensed. This was going badly. They needed to avoid creating a scene. He readied himself to make a move. Should he let the woman speak? Not too many passerby had stumbled over yet, but soon that would change. Eve looked the guard in the eye, then dropped her eyes. "I'm traveling with my brother and father." Her musical voice still sounded vaguely inhuman. "Why should I believe you aren't one of them, just waiting to enter our town? You have the look, don't you? Who are you?" The guard was quickly becoming more uncomfortable. "We lost 5 children in the last span of years. The Faceless took them and tried to trick us into letting them into our village. She has a strangeness to her. I cannot let you into our town." Lowering his spear, the guard began to call for others. Cain swore. Pulling Eve and Eddie around the edge of the wall, he could hear shouts rising, with others echoing back. If he killed the man in plain sight, they would still need to scale the barrier before gaining access into the town. Now, however, the guards would be on edge, looking for those that had caused the alarm. Cain knew they needed supplies. They needed entry into this village. "Why couldn't you have disguised yourself better? No one would believe you were a normal woman. Your clothes mark you as an outsider. We need to wait for the guards to die down and scale the walls. They'll kill us before we can get over the walls if they see us. We may have to wait for cover of darkness." "We won't last that long," Eddie said tiredly. "We have no water, unless you manage to bring some with you through the portal." Eve huddled next to Eddie. She was afraid she had made the wrong choice. She was now so far from the city of her people. Her power had begun to wane immediately. She trusted Eddie against all reason. Her people had been betrayed before. Many of them had been captured as slaves or had been killed. Humans were harbingers of pain and destruction. When a sect of her people had chosen to stand against their human oppressors, many more of her race had died. Humans had discovered that her people could be harvested for their power. It could be sapped out of them, and with it, their life force. Humans had not shied away from their discovery as the abomination that it was. Her people had died by the thousands. For an entire millennium, the great city had lay shrouded within the protective reaches of the desert. Every few hundred years, a traveler would stumble upon it, many discounting what they had seen as a fever vision. But a select few had been able to breach their walls, coming all the way to the very heart of the great city. When her people still held the walls, these few humans were butchered before they could steal away with the location of their city. Many of her kin felt no remorse over the humans that were killed, but she could not bring herself to do it. She saw grace and beauty in humanity. She envied the freedom they had, the freedom that Eve lacked. She was the last of her race. Tasked as the protector of the great temple, she was never to leave the safety of the city, but she had longed for seeing the world outside the great walls. Hers was a race that had been gifted with a blessing of flight. After hundreds of years, her people had grown weaker and more inbred as their numbers dwindled. Once a proud people, she was the last proof of their existence on this world. Long lived, her people had never taken heed to cultivate new offspring. After thousands of her people were murdered by the mad greed of humans, there were no longer the necessary number of them left to create a new generation. Now, Eve was alone. She did not understand the human word that Eddie had given to name her, but she felt a pull to him, something that had overcome her sense of duty. She did not want to lose contact. Was this an emotion humans shared, she wondered? It must be. She had felt Eddie's need for her. He did not slink and deceive as so many of the others before him had done. Others like Stannon, Cain, his true name. Eve did not understand how an eyeless brother had swayed dominance over Eddie. To leave him in Stannon's presence would be to consign him to death. She had risked everything by leaving the great city, but the oracle, it had spoken to him. The power of the sending still chilled the very fibers of her being. What Eddie had seen had been a true sight. Eve could still feel the echoes of the energy that had been released coming off Eddie in waves. It was dangerous, but could be the key to saving her people. She was the last. She covered her eyes with a hand and wept silent tears for them, for her sister, Amail. I turned to Eve, not sure how to react. She had become so quiet, so withdrawn. I was worried that a sickness had come over her. Her raw vitality had diminished to a mere shadow of its former self. What had Stannon said? Something about her power lessening the farther we moved away? Stannon held so many secrets. What secrets did he hold from me? Was I willingly walking into the serpent's den? I shifted my gaze to Stannon, who waited in silence. The guards had gathered before venturing out past the barred gate. We had hidden from them, which had been fairly simple to do since they had been loath to come out far from the safety of the town's walls. The gate's grill had been locked back into place, leaving the three of us with no way to get into the city. Hidden behind a recessed curvature in the outer wall, the wind continued to pick up, sand and dirt flying freely about. We could not risk a desert storm. We would be completely unprotected from the elements. But it might provide us the cover necessary to break past the fortifications. With luck, the guards would take refuge from the walls until the storm passed. We would just need to live through it. A rumble echoed across the landscape. Dark clouds boiled from above, the wind whipping up to a minor gale. Stannon gritted his teeth, his expression grim.